Good afternoon, evening, and morning, everybody, wherever you are in this great place. Welcome to the Cyber Insecurity Stream. My name, as always, is Neal Bridges, and thank you for joining me today. Thanks to all of our new joiners as well as our regular visitors. Real conversations with real people, that is direct from one of our guests, and that is what you can catch us here to do. This is going to be our short format, so I'm going to run through our intro very quickly. Listen, we do have moderators in chat, and I want to personally thank all my moderators each and every stream for their dedication. Moderators are here to keep chat free from sexist, racist, misogynistic, elitist, and otherwise toxic behavior. We have zero tolerance for toxicity in chat. I do trust my moderators explicitly. If you do get put on a timeout or a ban, you appeal to the moderators, don't appeal to me. They are not here, however, to stifle chat. They are here to make sure that your voices get heard. So we do ask that you ask questions in chat, ask questions very frequently. I'll be answering questions on stream. Obviously, you're here for my guest, which I'll introduce kind of in the next segment. He'll be here to answer questions on stream. Let me say one thing about questions. Your questions are very important to all of us. They're important to me. They're important to Tracy. They're important to the viewers who are going to watch this stream now and later on. And so we do ask that you ask your questions at any time. One of the biggest questions we get is, Neal, how do I ask a question? I just want to kind of familiarize everybody with this device called a keyboard right here. You simply use that and you place your question into the chat, and a moderator will grab said question and make sure that it gets up to me, and we will push it on screen for our guest. However, we do ask that you ask your question only once. Asking your question multiple times might be viewed as spamming and could result in a timeout or ban. So drop your question in chat. We'll absolutely get it asked about anything that's top of mind, anything that's being covered in the stream, and we will do our best to get it. So with that being said, that's it for our short version logistics out of the way. I do appreciate everybody tuning into our special kind of stream for today. We have a special cloud stream. Before I get started, I want to thank one of our community members, FK, for his help in producing some of the questions for today's stream. I'm glad to see that everybody was able to tune into today's stream, and I'm super excited to introduce my guest for today. Holding both the AWS Cloud Practitioner as well as several advanced Microsoft certs. My guest for today has spent most of his career being an expert in all things Microsoft. He spent 10 years with global knowledge as a Microsoft subject matter expert. Today, he's the director of cloud content for INE. Everybody, drop some bits, show some narwhal emote love, and put your hype hands in the air for my guest today, Tracy Wallace. Tracy, on behalf of my moderator team, my community, and myself, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Would you like to say anything?
Oh, man. First of all, Neal, thank you so much for having me on. I kind of feel like maybe I've hit the big time. I'm on cyber insecurity, so this is fantastic. Also, wow, right off the bat, that instructions on using the keyboard changed my life right there. So fantastic stuff.
Real conversations with real people. That's what we're about here.
Exactly. No, so I really do want to thank you. I mean, it's pretty interesting. I'm going to tell you all off the bat what I've told Neal, and that is that security people scare me. I'm not worried about the black hoodie. It's the knowledge you all have and the damage that you prevent. I won't say the damage you do. It's the damage you prevent, of course. It's one of those things, though. But honestly, so glad you're here. And I think that, there's such opportunity when we look at the cloud. And I say this as somebody, I don't even have, I'm sorry, my EJPT. I really should have that. But, but
we'll have a conversation about that later.
Yeah, I think I just got myself in trouble. But, as somebody who doesn't have any of those security acronyms after his name, I can't tell you how much I see the need for that blending of security and cloud, right? And, as we move everything to the cloud, it's almost like I see these two diametrically opposed visions of the cloud. On the one hand, it's like I'm not putting anything in the cloud because it's immediately going to be hacked. On the other side, it's, oh, cool, I'm just going to put it in the cloud and we can just get rid of all our security because it's all in the cloud.
You've been talking to way too many CIOs at that.
But I mean, I think that's probably a fairly safe assessment of what a lot of people think. And the reality is that obviously neither one of those are right. And I think when you look at taking people who have expertise in security, and if we can give those folks a little bit of expertise in cloud, and get a fundamental understanding of what that is, and frankly vice versa, then I think we're looking at such a safer world going forward. And having that ability to say, okay, we've got all this awesomeness to again, sorry to steal a Nealism there, but we have all this awesomeness that is the cloud. That as an application developer, the fact that I love to say at 11 o'clock at night, if I need to deploy an application in halfway around the world into Japan, I can do that. Right. But on the other hand, let's make sure that we're doing that in a way that's not going to give away the store. And that to me is something that is fascinating, and building that into the processes that we use as we build our applications, and saying, watching cybersecurity social is a fascinating exercise into itself, right? But that kind of that back and forth is security a cost? Or is security something that should be part of the architecture? And I have to believe, and full disclosure, I come at this as a developer who I just want my bits to get out there, and as long as they work, that's it. But I really do think that there's room to say, hey, let's build this security into the front end, build it into the process, so it's not in the way, but that it's part of our overall cloud experience. And that's if we can get there, and we know people get there, then I think it's time to hit the beach and drink some fruity drinks with umbrellas.
No, and that's fair. And I know that I know that we talk about cybersecurity a lot, and I definitely have got some cybersecurity stuff for us to chat about. And speaking of that, I'm glad you brought that up. We do have a priority question from Devnol Zen, who jumped in right off the bat. It said, from a security perspective, does one need to specialize in a specific cloud vendor, and what certifications are recommended from that security aspect? And this kind of gets into, I think, what you and I always talk about is that hybrid cloud approach. And so go ahead and take it off with that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things that, and as Neal said in the intro, look, I've got 25 years all total working, frankly, primarily in the Microsoft environment. I was totally excited when I got my certified cloud practitioner from AWS, because I was like, wow, that's the first non-Microsoft cert I've gotten in, let's just say, quite a while. Right? And so, one of the things that's been pretty cool that we're working towards here, that we've made a commitment to, is saying, let's look at cloud in general first. And I think from a security perspective, that there's almost two answers to that question. And here's where you can tell that I spent some time as a consultant, because I'm going to tell you both answers.
If you give us the lawyer answer, that's not going to fly on this stream. I'm just saying that right now.
Right now, you're not going to do yourself a disservice by learning a cloud vendor. And the reason for that right now is that if you're looking at certification, if you're looking to go and you don't have that 2 years of provable experience working in the cloud, so that's where getting a certification really helps. What you're going to find is that there are vendor certifications. So just by definition right now, that's a direction to go. Now, which is the best direction? Here's the thing. Honestly, if you would have asked me 2 years ago, I would have said, well, of course, Azure, right? And I still think Azure's really good. I mean, look, that's where my experience was. But the reality is, and I would say the two that I would put first would be AWS and Azure. I think Google Cloud Platform's absolutely there. And if you're on Google Cloud Platform, please understand, I'm not denigrating that at all.
Don't worry, I'll do that here in a second. It's fine.
But with AWS, you've got the oldest and biggest environment, and there's on the one hand there's a lot of opportunity in AWS, and the other hand there's also a lot of competition, right? But I mean, I think that pie is so big that you can't tell somebody it's a bad idea to head towards it. I would say Azure It's also very big. Azure has, quite frankly, the advantage of a very strong corporate pipeline as far as sales of Microsoft in general. And they're the second biggest, and they're growing at ridiculous rates, right?
Hmm.
Google and Google Cloud is look, if you've already gone down the direction, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I think if you're going to ask me straight up what which would I recommend? My recommendations would be AWS or Azure right now, which kind of goes to your question as far as would I recommend a specific cloud vendor? And the answer right now is probably yes. Now, that leads to where we're headed at INE, which is we're really looking at building cloud content. And by that, what I mean is when you start looking at it, something I've done, and every day I find this to be more true, is that there's more commonality between the cloud vendors than there are differences,
Hmm.
And so one of the things we're trying to do or we are doing is building content with that, if you will, generic cloud content first, right? So if you're talking about cloud security, Neal, let me ask you, cloud security, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
uh, Unsecure S3 buckets leaking millions of personal data all across the internet.
Okay, now I'm going to translate that. Okay, unsecured object storage.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
whether
fair.
you're looking at whether you're looking at AWS or Google, who both call them buckets, or you're looking at Azure, which calls it a storage account. All right, which I will give Azure 100% credit. Their names are much more rational than the
We
names they're
can't tell
given
that
by.
you're biased against Microsoft at all. Can you show that blue? Can you show a little bit more blue love on that?
No, look, honestly, huge fan of AWS. I just like to make fun of their naming convention a little bit. Um, but but whether it's a bucket or a storage account, all three of the vendors have object storage. All three of those vendors have object storage that is available to the public and can be accessed anonymously through a public IP address. And so then it becomes, what are the core concepts of securing that storage content? And those concepts are pretty much the same, right? Don't make it public unless it really needs to be public. And if it is public, make sure you are controlling it. Oh, and by the way, even if it's not public, you still should really be controlling who's accessing that, right? And I mean, my thing is, and this, Neal, is where I go to, uh, this you move things to the cloud, and it's neither completely safe or just absolutely vulnerable. It's the same thing, right? If you've got a file share in your on premises, you're probably going to protect that, right?
Yeah. I
So
mean,
why would you not?
but I guess I want to pick on that a little bit, and this kind of
Sure.
this goes into a little bit of a question, kind of a follow on question that I'll kind of lump up here as well, right? Because I think, you know, it's easy to say, well, nobody would put a Samba share, right? Any type of Windows file share, or something like that on the internet. So why would you put an S3 bucket or something like that out on the cloud? But I think what ends up happening in reality, right, or at least what I've seen that happens in reality, is cloud being part of the digital transformation and the digital workplace actually ends up being disassociated in the CIO organization away from the IT folks and more on the digital side, especially when it comes to like the e-commerce and the developers and things like that. And they're not necessarily as versed in don't put a network share on the internet as some of the IT guys who have had to deal with that back during some of the worm days that existed in the 2000s. And so why do we have such a disparity between how digital transformation technologies and developers and things like that haven't experienced that versus IT does? And I think that kind of dovetails into what this question is from White Cyberduck, which is how do you compare and contrast Azure, AWS, and GCP if we were to include their 3% market share, in that conversation as well?
All right.
I know that
So
was a
by the
lot.
way, no, that's okay, man. It's unpacking. That's awesome. I will say that kind of to me, the simple answer to The first part of that is that organizations are getting it wrong.
Mhm.
And just really quickly, one of the ways that I suggest people look at the cloud is think about, and I'll get to the question in a second, but I want to
Mhm.
hit that. Think about a WAN topology, right? And so let's say you're a large organization, you've got multiple data centers, and you have a wide area network, WAN wide area network set up, right? Well, you're going to secure the nodes of that network because they're all on premises. Well, my suggestion is when you're moving into the cloud that you simply treat the cloud as a node in your wide area network. And the reality is there's a lot of stuff the cloud gives you 100%, but fundamentally it's still a data center. And I think people get a little bit carried away with this concept of digital transformation and thinking that it's completely different. And I think probably the cloud vendors would be throwing things at me right now for saying that it's not different. You're still working on computers. There's still racks and racks of computers sitting there in the data centers
Yeah,
that the cloud vendors are providing. You're just responsible for a different layer within that. All right. Sorry, that's my long-winded pre-answer
that's okay.
to this. All right. So the question, can you contrast AWS and Azure? That's a great question. And
And
it's
don't
a
forget
question,
GCP.
and GCP, 100%. And then I'm gonna ask you to throw in on DigitalOcean while we're at it.
Oh, okay.
I know that's your jam there. That's right. I said that. I'll try not to bring
That's
those
okay.
in
That's all
again.
right. We can look.
Uh,
We can look cool. We can look cool against the people who are watching. It's okay.
all right, cool. Got to keep it current, right? That's what
Right.
I'm all about. So AWS and Azure, and here's the thing: there's more in common than there is different, right? What both AWS and Azure do, and what GCP does, and what DigitalOcean does, and what, believe it or not, Oracle and IBM do, is they're providing you with a compute environment
Mhm.
that you are renting rather than buying. And when it comes down to it, that's the core of what you're doing, right? So you're going to have things like virtualized machines. They call them different things, but if I want to spin up a virtual machine, then I can do that in a matter of minutes in essentially the same way across whatever vendor I want, right? Which is one of the reasons why a lot of organizations, when they make that transition to the cloud, the first thing they do is commonly called lift and shift, right? Where they say, hey, I've got these virtual machines on premises. I want to use the cloud data center to host them instead of my own. So we just take my virtual machines and we pop them into the cloud, right? And literally, you could do the exact same thing regardless of vendor. So from that standpoint, they're very similar. Now, where you tend to see differences, and this is kind of a big picture. So assume that these are two vendors that make essentially the same product,
Mhm.
okay? Because they do, right? What I would say from my personal experience is that Azure is a little simpler to use. Okay. And understand I'm certainly attempting to separate my 25 years of Microsoft experience. It's going to be easier for me because it's what I've been doing. But, separate that and say, but realistically, there's less that you have to do in Azure. On the other hand, you're going to have much more granular control of what you're doing in AWS. And AWS is more mature. It has more functions. I'll take an example. We did a pretty fun webinar a while back where we set up a multi-cloud hybrid networking environment. And so we had our on-premises environment, and then we had cloud environments set up in Azure, and I had cloud environments set up in AWS. And we set this up with just VPN. The options for VPN in AWS dwarf the options that
Mhm.
are available in Azure. I mean,
Yeah.
so that when it comes down to it, that in its simplest form is the way I would describe that.
But is
What
that
I
but
will say,
real quick though, is that a maturity problem? Is that just because AWS has been doing it longer? We know that Microsoft has a tendency to be 3 to 5 years behind we laugh, but I sat in an EBC at Microsoft one time, and they said we intentionally don't lead the way when it comes to security. We
Right.
wait for everybody else to do security, and then we'll pick the best practices and do our security product. So is that a business decisions on Microsoft's part to say we're going to let our Azure instance be 3 to 5 years behind AWS?
I think probably less so than it might appear. And certainly that's the outcome. Okay.
Yeah,
100%. That in a lot of ways, you can see Azure as chasing AWS.
yeah,
On the other hand, what I think is awesome is that we have a world that's not monopolized, right? And these two vendors in particular really push each other. And I was having a discussion with our I'm going to give a shout out to, we're very happy to have just brought on an AWS instructor. Fantastic guy, Brooks Seahorn. Look for his stuff coming up. We're going to get him active.
I think he's in
Great
chat. I
guy.
think I actually saw his name come across in chat. I think he's in chat. If everyone wants to say hi to
Never
Brooks.
mind. He's terrible. No, he's not. Brooks is great. But we were having this conversation about this one feature, which is a comm console. All right, and so I can go through the web-based console and connect directly to a virtual machine through its COM port and get to it. And what's interesting is that's something that has actually been in Azure for a good couple of years, and AWS just put that in. Right. And so I bring that up not to say, oh, well, see, Azure is always first. Not at all. AWS, 90% of the time, it's coming out in AWS first. 100%. That's true. But, they're pushing each other. Right. And that all goes back to this question that you've got here. What is the difference? Hopefully 5 years from now, it's going to be very little. Right. It's going to be like going to buy a car. The car does the same thing. What are the features? What are the prices? And that's where you make your decision point. And it's going to be really easy to see those differences.
Oh, that makes sense. And let's keep the questions coming in chat. I promise you, our moderators do see them and do push them up, put them in queue. I want to kind of piggyback though, because we kind of started down this S3 bucket route a little bit, and so I prepped a kind of a thread that I want to pull on with this, and this is something that the community had brought up specifically when we were prepping content for this, and while it's not specifically Azure related, we have seen just an utter disastrous amount of misconfigured S3 buckets, right? Just to highlight a few major ones over the years: June 2017, 198 million American voter records when a big data firm left an S3 bucket wide open. October 2017, master keys for Accenture's account with AWS Key Management, was leaked out. Obviously, 2019, we've got the massive 100 million, Americans were breached by Capital One, resulting in their $20 million lawsuit. And now recently, we've seen, in this case, right, we've seen Google and Azure came out first with their confidential computing, and then AWS kind of followed suit with their Nitro enclaves, as a way to protect sensitive data. And so, can you kind of talk a little bit? Can you kind of elaborate on what confidential computing is and how it could potentially reduce the possibility for some of these future breaches?
Yeah, absolutely. And confidential computing is such a really cool concept. And it's one of those things where I think it's an IEEE initiative initially, but all the vendors, both on-prem, all the cloud vendors are part of the consortium that's working with this. And the idea being that within your compute, what you need is a walled off fortress to compute. And oftentimes what that's called is an enclave. And when you get down to it, that's what confidential compute is all about. It says, look, we're going to use a combination of hardware and software to define this walled off fortress. And when I say walled off, it's walled off from everything, including anything else running on that processor. I can't even connect to it with a debugger. Okay. So, you think about, all right, I'm going to sneak in and attach a debugger, and I'm going to steal everything you have because it's going to go in and, hit the memory and dump the memory out, and I've got you. Can't do it. Because what happens is that enclave that that gets created for you with confidential compute. So that's the idea. Say, hey, I'm going to use confidential compute. What does that mean? It means that I'm going to start up this process on a machine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, that machine could be just a physical, right? When we talk bare metal, it could be virtual machine. But what happens is you get this physical space. It's a combination of compute and memory, and it's walled off from everything. And in fact, if something attempts to say inject code into that is not already been certified for that enclave, the enclave shuts down, right?
So
And
I think
now,
every hacker on this stream just heard it's impossible to steal data out of one of these confidential computers secure enclaves.
and so now I'm sure every hacker is now setting up their scripts to prove me wrong. Right? Would that be the mentality that?
That's very much what it is. We gotta prove this wrong.
So I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? And obviously, nothing is unhackable.
Right.
Okay. That there you go. Hopefully I just brought the temperature down. But probably more so than anything else that's out there right now.
Yeah.
You can make the argument that if you're using confidential compute and what you hear, a term that you hear is called a trusted execution environment.
Okay.
All right. And the idea is that you've got, and typically you're going to want one that's hardware based. There are software based versions of it, but fundamentally, and all of the cloud vendors, for example, support hardware supported confidential compute, right? And so what that says is that you're going to take this workload, you're going to put it in the cloud. Okay, it's running on servers that you don't physically have the ability to go and unplug, but make the argument based on the way it's defined, it's probably going to be more secure than literally anything you could do on premises that's not air gapped, because you've got this fortress of encryption that's hardware supported, that's going around your workload, and the idea being that you complete end-to-end encryption. We're not talking, you think about encryption and you think about the model that you often see is that you've got encryption at rest, supported, in fact, enforced across all the cloud providers.
Right.
You have encryption in transit, right? Again, supported and generally enforced across all the providers, but then you've got compute.
Right.
Well, now what we have is we have enforced and walled off encryption at the compute level. And that's really what confidential compute gives you.
So it's less about protecting private data and it's more about creating these safe spaces where you can conduct these transactions in a secure fashion.
Right. I mean, you're tying up one of the loose ends, right? Because you're saying, look, at some point that data has to be processed, and if you're not locking that down, that data process represents a risk.
Mm-hmm.
Fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Right. And so what you're doing with confidential compute is you're locking that bit of it down so that you have that end-to-end secure process. Now, what it doesn't do is it doesn't protect your S3 bucket.
This is what I was going to ask. Right? I was like, this all sounds great in theory, but what is it not doing for the organization? What is the loophole? What is the thing? What's the thing around the corner that organizations aren't seeing as they're hearing this is going to protect your private data?
Well, is that it's part of a system. It is not the system. It goes back to the comment about when you move things to the cloud, you're not all of a sudden relieved of all your responsibilities to have good security practices, right? And one of the common terms you hear is shared responsibility model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I make the argument that you could apply that differently here, that confidential compute is part of a shared responsibility model. It's taking care of one vulnerability, but it's not taking care of vulnerabilities it has nothing to do with. Now, I can use it, right? I can manage my encryption keys within there, right? So I've got, let's say private key in there. I send a public key out. And so I'm securing that, and that's awesome. But, I can do that with other technologies as well. What this does is it gives me this space, and it opens up beyond security. I mean, it opens up to pretty cool things. One of the really neat use cases for it is collaborative data analysis and like machine learning. Think about.
Oh God, you brought in the machine learning. Oh God, everybody's eyes are going to roll. Here we go with machine learning again.
Okay, we'll try to keep this. We'll try to keep this short and not putting them to sleep. Think about, let's say, the current pandemic, okay? And you've got these different pharmaceuticals that have created different vaccines. What if they could take and, without warning about any possibility of their data getting pushed to someone else, or someone getting their data, you could push data from these different pharmaceuticals into a single model and start doing some really impressive processing and modeling to see, hey, can we get some shared benefit from this?
Right.
And those are use cases beyond just the core security element that something like confidential compute opens up, and frankly, where the cloud is such a natural place for that to live.
All right, so pulling away from that a little bit, and kind of getting a little, kind of deeper and kind of specific into something that you're probably, a little bit closer to heart, coming to the blue side. Fortune 100s oftentimes, and you mentioned key management a little bit, right? Fortune 100 companies, and I've seen this in my experience as well, right? They have very strict guidelines governing key management, but they do it horribly. Like it's easy to write a policy, but nobody actually ever implements and does it right. What features specifically does Azure offer to kind of help them protect that data in the cloud?
That's actually a pretty easy one. It's called Key Vault. There is actually a service in Azure, and honestly, there's an equivalent service in the other cloud vendors as well. Mm-hmm. And what Key Vault does is it gives you an environment, and I'm, without trying to look it up, trying to remember the security world.
Somebody's gonna put you on the spot for it.
I looked it up. It's possible I had it up there, brought it up through the magic of a keyboard. But there's this concept, and I will tell you that I can talk to this at a high level when we start getting into the weeds about the security world. But it's a really neat thing where there's hardware that's designed to say, look, this is an absolutely isolated hardware environment, and you can buy the hardware. And from what I understand, it would cost you to do this in your own data center millions of dollars to get this hardware based environment set up. Now, what you do with the cloud providers, and my experience is more Key Vault than anything else, is that you say, look, I would like that. Give it to me, please. And they do. Right. And so you get the benefit of this, millions of dollars of hardware investment that they've got in their data center. I mean, these are actual physically secured worlds in their data center, and they're giving you access to that so that, you've got the highest level of encryption available to store your keys, to store your certificates, and even to store secrets, which is basically any data you want to store.
Right.
And, that's tied in at a really basic level. I use that all the time. For example, if I've got sensitive data passwords, I'm deploying virtual machines and everything else at some point, and this goes to where you can have all of the procedures you want. Somebody's going to violate it at 11 o'clock at night because they need to get something.
or 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon.
5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. Right. Exactly. Right. And so, what do? They say, oh my God, let me just put this, I'm just going to put the password in the plain text.
Right.
And we're done. Right.
Right.
And how many enterprises, and nobody answered this, but how many enterprises do you think you can go on, and somewhere you're going to find a file that's got a bunch of passwords in it?
Right. Right.
But what we can do is we can say, pop that password into Key Vault, have really strong role-based access control, controlling access, and also audit trail. So you can absolutely audit what's going on with it, right? And then tie that into some of the services like deployment, so that I could actually even deploy an environment and never know the passwords that are being used, right? I can say, okay, I'm deploying it, deployment set up to use this Key Vault, use this particular secret, and it deploys, and I'm none the wiser.
But this isn't a new concept, right? We've had CyberArk and privileged access management and things like that for years. I guess, before you answer this question from Tanawa on screen, though, why should we care about, why is there anything innovative about Key Vault, or is this just we're trying to make it part of the standard way that we do business? Right? I almost, when I see things like Key Vault, and I'm going to small soapbox here, small tiny soapbox, right? But
Yeah.
when I see Azure do something like Key Vault, or when we talk about key management, I have a feeling that people went back and say, we probably should have built this into the first time around. CyberArk's made a really good business model on this. Let's build it into Azure and AWS, and let's do it right the second time around. There's really nothing special about this. They're just finally integrating it in normal, what you should be doing best practices anyway.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry if you're looking for some
I
disagreement
just
on that.
making sure we're
Sure
demystifying that it's not some magical thing that happens out there.
No. I think what you get, and this is actually fairly common with cloud in general,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is you get economy of scale,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they can go out and they can buy the best hardware to implement this on. So it's going to be a hardware based solution. And then you're not paying for that, right? You're just going and saying, okay, I want to use that. It's all pre-configured. And it's all available. And I'm gonna kind of try to translate that into this question: can I integrate my own KMS into Key Vault? And the answer is yes, you can. The key word that you asked there is "can I?" And the answer is yes. Now, is your KMS integrated into Key Vault? That's another answer, and you didn't ask that question, so I'm not going to answer it. And I've already put a note: do not ask that question. But what you're going to find, and again, this is something honestly that's true across all the vendors, is that everything that you do through, I'm going to say Azure, just because we're talking Key Vault, everything you do through Azure is at its base level going through a REST API. Okay, and if you're not familiar with that, REST API, application programming interface, REST API is just web-based. It's just saying, look, there's a service over there. You have a service. I need to use it. Everybody in the world uses HTTPS, so let's just do that, right? And let's use HTTP as our transfer modem protocol, et cetera. So in any case, you have this universal and ubiquitous API layer that's going to give you access to Key Vault, which means it can be integrated into anything. So that's why I'm very glad you said the word "can I integrate," because the answer is yes.
What about should you integrate? Should you do your own KMS? What are some shoulds or should nots do in that? Should you just be like, no, it's integrated in Azure, why wouldn't you just keep it all in Azure?
Well, I think the answer to that question is two things. What do you have now? And how much is it going to cost you to maintain that over time? Right? Because when it comes down to it, the driver for cloud is cost. Right? And that's what it should be. Assuming that you understand things like the shared responsibility model.
Right.
And assuming that you're going to implement best practices. I realize that I'm living in fantasy land right now. Okay, but conceptually,
I was gonna say we're living it. We're living in the land where the CIOs, actually listen to you.
Right. Okay, so let's just assume that, right? Assume we have a ladder, if you're familiar with that joke. But assuming those things, then the decision to go to cloud is an economic decision, and so going to the should you move your KVM? Do you have a functioning KVM? Does it provide sufficient level of security, right? And understanding again that one of the things with Key Vault, it is again based on this hardware-based security model, right? And what's it going to cost you to maintain that versus what's it going to cost you to redo everything to use Key Vault, and that's why, like, a lot of times when you're talking about the cloud model and cloud architecture, this is way beyond the concept of Key Vault or keys or security. There typically is a maturity process, and initially when you move into cloud, it's almost always lift and shift, right? Because that's going to be, frankly, the least investment. You're making the least use of what's in the cloud, but you're also not having to invest in any kind of re-architecting. And then over time, you start to re-architect your solutions to take best advantage of what's in the cloud. But I'll make the argument that unless you've done the financial analysis of that, right, then that's not the right move to make. And so, again, it's on the one hand, it's a non-answer to your direct question,
Well, but
but
I,
I
but I
feel
want to
it's
but I want to pick on that a little bit, because when we talk about doing the cost analysis, and I recently just came from an organization where they were very, very heavy in Azure. I mean, we're talking
as it
eight.
should be.
Yeah, eight. We're talking eight figures heavy invested into Azure type thing. But
Mhm.
then they decided to expand out into a hybrid cloud model, and they actually went to GCP instead of AWS. Now, from that perspective, it was because AWS provided unfortunately, some competitiveness to what they were trying to offer, and so GCP made sense. But what is the cost benefit analysis of incurring more cost by introducing a hybrid cloud model that may have two different pricing schemes, two different, there's obviously going to be data transference that happens between those two cloud models that could impact your costs and things like that. And so if it is all about the Benjamins, and people are moving to the cloud because it's cheaper, then what's the rationale? What's the cost benefit to doing a hybrid cloud approach?
Honestly, as far
Or I
as
should say
the straight
multi-cloud, not hybrid
financial,
cloud, multi-cloud.
again, if let's say that I'm highly invested in Azure, right?
Hmm.
And I look at Google Cloud, and I'm just going to throw something out here. I need to run a MySQL database.
Hmm.
This is probably not the scenario, but just to throw
Yeah.
something out there,
Yeah.
right? Say, okay, and I look at what it's going to cost me to run that in Google Cloud, and it's 50% cheaper than it would be to run the same thing in Azure. And then, honestly, what I should be doing after that is then exactly what you said. I need to look at the total cost, right?
Hmm.
Because all of the clouds love for you to take your data and push it into them. I don't know of a cloud that has an ingress cost. Okay. They all have egress costs.
Right.
So, exactly like you said, how much data are you pushing back and forth there now that is going outside of the cloud that you weren't having to pay for before?
Yeah.
Now, I will also tell you that there are calculators that are out there that it's not a hard calculation to make,
Hmm.
at least at the estimate level, right?
Hmm.
But I will say that I think, and this is probably true universally, nothing to do with cloud, is that a lot of cloud decisions are not made fully rationally, one way or
That
the other.
explain that one a little bit, because I think you can take that a couple different ways.
So,
Yeah, I think you
all right,
mean they're not made in being fully informed in the decisions they're making.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that people are like going off the deep end making these decisions,
But they
but when I
are.
when I look at right, but I won't say that. But if I want to make a rational decision, I'm an engineer. You know, what I need to do is I need to look at the facts, and I need to say that is this a financial decision? And it certainly should be partially. Now there are some things beyond financial. I'll hit in just a second, right? But you know, a lot of times these decisions are made by people who don't have the full understanding of what that decision means,
Hmm.
right? So you are given the directive that you are moving to this cloud or you're moving from this cloud.
Hmm.
And look, and I brought up at the very beginning, and talking about how, or actually, I think it was in conversations with you that I think when you look at things, for example, like open source and how there's such a movement to open source, you could say part of that is because for so long there were these decisions that were made because a salesperson took an executive out golfing and they sold them something, right?
Right. Right.
And I mean, you can look, and I'm old enough to have known a lot of the people that were mid-level and lower in the days of mainframe, and they would get so frustrated with the way the mainframe vendors, no, won't list anybody, but they have three initials as their name, would force decisions at the executive level that the people that were actually running these things knew were not the right decisions, right? That when an alternative came about, They were like, and these people got in a position where now they had some say. They moved away from mainframe as fast as they could, even though realistically it wasn't always the best decision. And I can tell you
Mm-hmm.
stories about that.
Yeah.
And I think, you have some of that with cloud where decisions are made at a corporate level that says, okay, hey, we want to move there. And that's not look, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying moving to the cloud is a bad decision. I think it's a good decision, right? But I think it's not always made, I think you said, with full information.
Yeah. Yeah.
And somebody, again, love salespeople. I wouldn't have a job without salespeople.
Right.
But a salesperson got a hold of the right person, convince them maybe without all of the information that they need to make this move. And so going back to your actual question, hey, what about the hybrid cloud? I will say beyond the financial, right? Which I think it should always be the first, because if it's not the first, what happens, and this is so documented, 6 months down the line, somebody looks at the bill and says, why did you do this? And then everything moves, right? I mean,
it's very true. Yeah.
But so aside from the financial, the other thing is that you do have an issue of reliability, and there are things beyond just the financial. Now if you look at the service level agreements across the vendors are very consistent. And in fact, for example, if you're looking at compute, they all have 4 nines availability, right? So 99.99% of the time in any given month, your compute is going to be available, whether you're running in Azure or AWS or GCP.
Yeah.
Right? But how much do you trust them?
I think it's a good.
And so,
go ahead.
No, and I was going to say that to me is, and if you want to use the word trust, kind of as a really big word encompassing a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think that's the other rational reason to make a decision to go hybrid cloud across multiple vendors.
Yeah. So I just looking at the time, I want to confirm you're still good, Tracy. I think we'd originally scheduled this slot for an hour, but I think we're going to push over a little bit. There's still a lot of questions in chat that I want to hit. Remind chat to go ahead and drop their questions in, and moderators will get it to you. You kind of hit on a couple topics, and I saw chat talking a little bit about this, and so I want to kind of pull on a thread there. And for everybody who's watching, if you use !trends in chat, I found a report, Tracy. There's an individual by the name of Cheryl Hung, who is the VP of Ecosystem for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and she had given her top 10 predictions for cloud native in 2021. I don't want to get into all 10 of them because we'd be here for even longer. But I did want to get your take on the 3 that I thought were interesting, and you brought them up a little bit here, and so I kind of want to pull the thread on them a little bit. And so the first one is, as we push more and more technologies like applications and IoT and things like that to the edge, there's an anticipation that Kubernetes on the edge will continue to bring advancements to cloud data centers. Would you like to weigh in and give us some thoughts on that?
That might have been written by that was probably snuck in there by Microsoft, because
look at that.
That fits really nicely with their approach. And so I'm going to throw this out here because I'm not sure where everybody is in terms of what their knowledge is, but edge compute is something that has been a buzzword for a good couple of years now. Mm-hmm. The basic idea is that, and I think you mentioned IoT, that's usually the use case you hear about it, is it's about moving the compute closer to the point source of information or point sources of information. So let's just really quickly, I hope you don't mind me taking.
Yeah, go for it. Have at it.
Yeah. Think about a factory, right? I've got a factory and I've got a process, could be a chemical factory, and I'm running a process that has 200 steps. I actually used to work at a glue factory. Now this was prior to IoT, but they had just sort of automated and they had all these sensors and all that. And so what you do with edge computing is, there's all of this machine learning, all this analysis that we can do there. I use that's twice. I've said machine learning. Sorry about that. but we have all of this data analysis, and you've got this flood of data, right? And the initial cloud solution to that is that you're going to take all these point sources, and they're just going to push that data up to a cloud, right? And there's these systems built to handle just millions of messages per second coming in. Fantastic. The problem is that your factory is probably not set up really to push that kind of load. So what edge computing does is, okay, we know what we're looking at for, and again, I'm gonna use IoT because that's a
Yeah.
really good
Yeah.
example for
Well, and I think we
edge.
could also use IoT and manufacturing kind of interchangeably in that conversation.
Absolutely, because that's a huge
Hmm.
implementation of IoT, right? And particularly with this, right? So, okay, so let's take that chemical factory as an example. What we're going to do is we're going to move a system that can handle the influx of data from the point sources, from the sensors that are in that factory, and it can process them and look at things like streaming data, defining alerts, looking at averages, making sure that your temperatures are right throughout the process, whatever it is, and then as necessary, push that data up to the cloud as well,
Hmm.
right? And so what you see, I mean, the reality is edge computing could be you taking a rack, mounting that rack in a factory, popping some blades in that rack, and running your analysis, right? And the edge computing is not kind of it's not mystical. It's just a term for taking that compute power and putting it. Now, what you'll find, and I mentioned Azure, and we'll get to Kubernetes in a second. What you'll find is that the cloud vendors are certainly aware of this, and they would like you to pay them to help you do this, right? And so Azure, for example, has a number of solutions from something that's software based
Hmm.
to they will literally ship you a system. And it could be a rack system. It could be actually a containerized system that they're going to ship out to you that you're going to plug in, and then you're going to have this, and it's essentially like a little mini cloud system that you've got on your premises, right? And then, well, why would I do that as opposed to say just spinning up my own hardware? And really, that's where it's the same economic uh, considerations that you have with using the cloud in general, because you're essentially renting that edge compute solution,
I'm not gonna
right?
lie.
But
When you
edge
said
compute,
when you started to do that rack example, I envisioned somebody taking a rack and moving it closer to the boundary of the network,
well, that's the way it should be, right? Push it right up against that machine, and
right up against
so
that
you've got
cable
the
modem, and
short,
just call it good.
absolutely, absolutely, right? Keep your cables as short as possible. But no, so that's when you start talking about edge, and then you look at saying, okay, what's the logical way to integrate that? Because at some point you're going to collect so much data, and you're going to want to collect so much data that you're not going to want to house that on the edge,
Right.
right? So you bring your compute, you bring your analysis close, but you have the ability to then take that data. Could be over the internet. Frankly, it could be physically. You're taking drives and shipping them to a cloud provider, and right, and they're ingesting that data in. Okay, for free, by the way, because they're always happy to bring it in.
Incoming is always free. Incoming is always free.
Incoming. That's
Okay,
right.
so
That's
that's a good one on edge computing. It definitely sounds like and I like how you took that and you said we're going to demystify this a little bit because that's definitely something that we're huge on the stream is demystifying that
right.
stuff. And so and I'm glad you used I think one of the hard things when we talk about Kubernetes on the edge and edge computing, right, is
Oh
really
yeah,
focusing on. Hmm?
I didn't even mention Kubernetes. Sorry about that. Go
That's
ahead.
okay. No, it's fine. It's all good. Is the use in the manufacturing space, because I do think that that is one of the biggest use cases for it, more so than the Kubernetes side. I want to move on to the second one really quick though. One of the second things that Cheryl brought up in her report, right, was some synergies basically between GetOps and agile development, especially with thousands of Kubernetes clusters, with hundreds of thousands of applications. And you and I have shared some tweets between each other on this DevOps concept. And so as soon as I
Right.
saw this come up in a report, I was like, oh, I got to put Tracy on the spot when we talk about some DevOps stuff, right? How do you see GetOps transforming the DevOps space?
So great question. First of all, let me take a step back in case folks aren't intimately familiar with GitOps. Um, GitOps is a combination of really two things, and one of them is not directly Git, although you would think so, although it plays a part. So GitOps is typically a combination of DevOps and infrastructure as code. And DevOps, again, just a quick step back,
Mm-hmm.
combination of development and operations, take the two sides that are always in opposition and try to make them work
And
together
don't forget to put security in
effectively.
the middle of it.
Sec DevOps, 100%. Um, they make it all work better. But that was, you like that
Yeah,
little pandering to the
yeah,
community here.
yeah, yeah.
But so, with DevOps, and one of the things you hear all the time with DevOps is pipeline, right? And if this were a class, I'd be whiteboarding this out right now, but I won't make you, I won't subject you to that. But so the idea is, I'm a developer. I make some changes to code. I want to get that change up because we have 300 developers working together. We put that in a central repository. It has to go through process, has to compile, has to go through test, has to go through security checks,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually it has to get out to wherever it's going to be, wherever it's going to live, right? And automating that whole process is part of what DevOps is. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's if you will, the physical part of DevOps. There's much more to it, but that's one thing, right? And then you have infrastructure as code.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that a lot of people may be familiar with, it's kind of generic, is Terraform.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not, it's fine. Super cool concept, super cool system. But the idea is that, okay, I want to be able to define an end state of the systems that are going to run my workloads, right? So I have a web application. My web application needs to run on Kubernetes. That means I need Kubernetes. It also, by the way, needs a relational database, and it needs a document database, and it probably needs networking. So there's a number of things that are necessary to support my application, my workload. And what infrastructure as code does, it says, look, rather than going through this manually, right? What you want to do is have a way to define out what you want and basically submit that.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes down to it, that's what infrastructure as code is. And all of the cloud vendors have support for this. In Azure, we've got Azure ARM templates. In AWS, you have AWS CloudFormation. In Google, you have something. I swear they have something. But,
You can tell that that's where that 3% market share comes in. It's like Google's got something. I just don't care enough about
they,
it
they,
to.
they do. Yeah. No, they do, and it's like a template. It's called a template. It's the same thing, right? But so what that does, and what's really important is by saying, okay, I can define this template, and it's a simple file. It's using typically either JSON or YAML, which are just two different data structures, simple data structures. And it says, okay, I want to define everything I want, define it out in this file. Cool. Well, now I can take that file and I can put it into the same kind of version control repository, Git, that I use for my code, right? And furthermore, I can actually automate the deployment of that the same way I automate the deployment of my code.
Mhm.
And actually, it was really cool because one of the first things I did when I came to INE was I actually set up GitOps, not even honestly intentionally. I set it up to make my life. I didn't set it up to. I set it up intentionally. I didn't accidentally set it up. I didn't set it up because it was GitOps. I set it up because I was tired of having to, every time I wanted to test this application that I was using for all my demonstrations, I was tired of having to recreate the resources and then push the code,
Right.
right? So I happened to use at the time, because, the blue tent here, I used Azure DevOps,
Hmm.
and I used a pipeline in Azure DevOps. And what that pipeline did is it went and I had my code that was, in my case, it was C Sharp, ASP.NET Core MVC application. Don't judge. And what it did was it compiled that, but I also had this ARM template so that I could push out and make sure that the web application I wanted to push the code to existed, right? And so the pipeline took care of literally everything. I could delete everything, and the moment I checked my code in, it would go through the process, not just deploy my code, but deploy the resources for my code, right? And that's the kind of functionality that you get when you're looking at GitOps. And because of the way the cloud providers have really defined their environment, they're the most absolutely natural place to put that. Now, I'm going to ask you, Neal. You don't see any problem with that developer being able to do that, do you?
None whatsoever. We've never had any problems in the SDLC, the secure development lifecycle, of any developer in any Fortune 100 company I've ever looked at. Zero, no issues whatsoever.
All right, good,
Yeah.
fantastic.
So as you're talking about infrastructure as a code, though, Tracy, Gerald comes through and he says, would infrastructure as a code sidestep patching? Could you just tear down the machine and redeploy a new machine?
So the answer to that, because I'm on a security stream, is no. Okay.
But
the real answer is actually still no.
yeah.
And you wouldn't want to do it that way because, first of all, when it comes to patching, when you create a new virtual machine, let's take that example, right? So I'm going to spin up a new virtual machine. I'm going to say, look, I know there's a new patch that came out for Ubuntu 20 whatever. And, I want to make sure I include this. So I'm just going to spin up a new virtual machine. Right. And so when you spin up a new virtual machine, it's based on an image. Now, when you're basing that new virtual machine on an image, what you're doing is you are relying on the provider of that image, always keeping it up to date patched. It is possible that you can have a service, and I know there's like an Ubuntu, I forget what it is. Basically, it's an elevated service where essentially they are doing that with their images.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But but you would have to, first of all, make sure that's the case, right? So you are relying on the provider of that image to provide the up-to-date patching.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now, the other thing is that it is likely going to involve more downtime to tear down that virtual machine, redeploy it, rebuild it, reconnect it to everything that you've got behind it. Now, an assumption here is that you're using what's called infrastructure as code. Okay, and just a quick thing here. When we're talking cloud, two variations that are common. There's three that are typically identified, but software as a service, we're not going to deal with here because we're talking about the cloud providers where you're hosting your own. It's going to be infrastructure as a service. Long story short, with infrastructure as a service, you are responsible for the operating system up through your workload.
Mm-hmm.
With platform as a service, the provider is actually handling everything other than your workload, right? So if I want to deploy a web application, then I'm going to deploy that as platform as a service, and I don't have to care about maintaining anything below my workload. Okay. Now, and again, so taking exactly the question that was asked, which would be infrastructure as a service, because you're managing the virtual machine. Theoretically, you are running a production workload on that virtual machine. So if you're going to take that down to rebuild it, that's probably more downtime than applying the patch.
Mm.
So there's that. Now,
because IT people would never at all mess with anything that would affect downtime.
No, of course not. Hey, I get to live in my fantasy world.
That's right.
Don't mess with it.
That's right.
Right?
So, go ahead.
No, so what I was going to say is one thing to consider there is, there's two things. First of all, I know Azure has it, and I'm 90% sure AWS has it. That there are automated patching services now that are available from the cloud providers, right?
Because we should definitely trust vendors to auto patch.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? No, but I would rather do that than rebuild all the way.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think, when we go back to the original question, we're talking about infrastructure as code. Ideally, that definition file, right? Yeah. That in-state definition file is going to be pretty static. Mm-hmm. Static's not quite the right word, but it's not going to be volatile. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Right. Because and so conceptually that shouldn't have to be deployed frequently. And to me, that is a key element when you're talking about GitOps in general, and when you're talking about infrastructure as code, is if you're having to redeploy that definition frequently, you might want to look at your process.
So another question came through as you were talking about Terraform. Is there an alternative for Terraform in Azure?
Yeah, absolutely. And the alternative, and again, this is kind of what I was saying, you'll find it in all three of the providers. You've got in Azure, you have what's called ARM templates. They also have something new that I've seen mixed reviews on, and I'm slightly skeptical. And that is something called Bicep. And I think I'm slightly skeptical because I think it's a goofy name, and that violates, one of the benefits of Azure. So, yeah. But also, they've kind of layered in a programming language to it where I haven't really seen a need for that in anything I've done. And I use Azure templates all the time. Everything that I do in Azure, unless I'm literally want to use the portal just because it's a visual demonstration. But if I'm doing anything real in Azure, I'm doing it using ARM templates. And there's tooling that's built, just like there's tooling for Terraform. There's all kinds of tooling that's built up for Azure templates. I use Visual Studio Code for pretty much everything. And hey, that's not just for Microsoft anymore. It is a well-received cross-platform development environment. And they've got great tooling for ARM templates. And actually, for the I'm gonna jump the shark here a little bit. I'm doing a webinar. That's right, Mr. Azure. I'm doing a webinar on Thursday looking at using AWS and looking at using some of the well-architected framework principles, and could you actually apply that to a real application and make it work? And one of the things I'm doing there is I'm using AWS CloudFront to define my resources.
Yeah.
And it's something. So a Terraform is a fantastic product. It's got a huge community that supports it. We actually use Terraform. Hopefully that's okay to say in a security, right? That's not giving away too much.
No, I think you're good there.
Okay.
But I do want to stop you right there because it does beg into a couple of different questions here, and we do have some people who do disagree with you, and one of the things that we like to do is put people on stage when there's some disagreements, and so that heat that you're feeling from the bottom up, that's a little bit of the hot seat starting to kick in here a little bit. So this one from Try Vanilla JS comes to and says, why not make your own VMs? If security is that much of an issue, create a Docker image out of it and host it in ECR.
Wait a minute, so that's supposed to be disagreeing with me?
That's the light. That's the light disagreement. I've got another one. We're just chilling for that one. That one's the small shot across the bow.
So first of all, I don't consider that a shot across the bow. I'm going to tell you that if I have my choice, I'm never doing anything infrastructure as a service, because there's just too many options that are too easy to deploy.
You lose all the control.
Yeah, but who needs that? I mean, I'm a dev. I don't care. You guys can figure it out. No, and this kind of goes. So ECR, if you're not familiar with it, ECR is Elastic Container Registry. That is an AWS service that holds images for containers. Now, if you talk to me at all and you make the mistake of bringing up containers, which you have now just done, you're hitting a vein that is my absolute favorite. Every workload that I write now, the first thing I do is I containerize it, because what that allows me to do is, as long as I don't care about silly things like security, it allows me to take that workload and deploy it to on-premises, to any of the cloud providers I want at a moment's notice, right? And it doesn't matter what I write the application and what I write the workload in, I containerize it. All right. And my preference, you can actually containerize to Windows, but I tend to containerize to Linux because that way it's truly universal.
Mhm.
I don't want to go too far down that road, um, but I would say that containerizing solutions, in all seriousness, does not increase the security of the solution, right? And you probably would be the one to bring these up more than me, Neal. But there are documented instances of container breakouts,
There are. Yeah.
right? Where somebody can, basically go through a container, and we would go until about 7 o'clock if I get
Right.
too far down the container road.
Right.
But honestly, hit me up on social and we'll talk about containers. Love to. But if in and of itself, containerizing a solution does not get you away from the security concepts. Now, containerizing a solution, running it on Kubernetes, running Kubernetes on your own virtual machine as an infrastructure, as a service, is going to give you complete control,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it also means that you are now responsible not only for understanding and patching the operating system, you're also responsible for understanding, properly configuring, which is no small feat, and patching your Kubernetes in addition to your workload, in addition to making sure that there's not injected vulnerabilities based on a chain of what are called images for your container, right? And so the answer is to that question, before you hit me with one that's apparently much worse, is I'm with you. Make everything a container, but understand that making everything a container doesn't in any way automatically improve the security footprint of that workload.
I think the only thing that I would caveat, or not caveat, but the only thing I'd add on to that, right, when we talk about the containerization thing, right, is and you and I have kind of chatted with this a little bit, and it's about it's still so new and it's developer centric that it's almost like for us as on the security side, we go back to the days when IT was brand new, when when desktop engineers and server engineers and folks like that would just put servers on the internet without any patching and with 445 open to the internet and things like that. And so I think our fear, right, is that there's this new concept of containerization and Docker and Kubernetes and things like this really kind of bring a lot of flexibility and a lot of opportunity into the DevOps space. But, there's such a rush to get them out the door and there's such a rush to use them in production. And I think this kind of carries over into maybe that third kind of part of Cheryl's report that I do want to highlight on before I hit you with this other question, right? There's this entire ecosystem that's emerging inside the DevOps space, where you can use open source code and it's becoming the norm to do open source code. And I can remember back in our day on the IT, it's like, open source code was a very last resort sort of thing. Like you only did that if you had no money, no budget, no time, and you just had to get something out the door. And now it's becoming very, very mainstream. Do you think that open source has become so predominant that it's going to be driven either by the end user or by developments and shoved down IT's throat?
That's a good question. And my answer would be that it's probably, in a sense, the wrong question.
Okay.
Because I think that it's so ubiquitous now that it is the industry as a whole. If you want to say IT as a whole, it's not the developers, it's not the end users, it's not the database administrators, it's not the IT administrators. It's honestly kind of everybody, And for example, we've talked about Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is incredibly powerful. I think it is also, and I'm not at all on a different page than you because I think it's really complicated, right? But it's here. It's what's going to be used. So
every CISO in the world is shaking their head at that answer right now. Be like, no, that can't be the case.
But it is. I mean, you can choose not. Okay, you can choose not to do it.
Yeah,
100%. You can choose not to be on social media. but you're going to, I realize that's a different thing, but the point is that there's so much momentum moving to, and just Kubernetes is one example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, look, when you think, for example, when you think of, I'll take another one. I'll get back to Kubernetes. If you think DevOps and you
Mm-hmm.
think tooling for DevOps, what do you think? What comes to mind?
Jenkins.
Jenkins,
Yeah.
right? Everybody's using it. Who owns that?
It's open source. Yeah. Yeah.
There
But
you go.
it's used to some of the biggest enterprises in the world, and it's become like the standard that you're going to go and use.
Right, and that's the phenomenon that I've seen, and it's interesting because from my perspective, and being a Microsoft guy, all right, I remember a few things. First of all, there was the former CEO of Microsoft who said that open source is a cancer. That is
That's a little
I mean
harsh. That's a little harsh.
yeah. Yeah, and I remember some of the other people saying, "Yeah, sure, open source is free as long as you don't value your time." And but you take one of, depending on the day, one of the if not the highest market cap company in the world, or one of the top three, and you go from those kinds of statements to being in some years, by some measures, the most active organization in the open
Mm.
source community,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I mean, to me, that kind of tells you that it is the industry,
Yeah.
and you cannot like that, but the I guess, and here we go. I'm probably going to set off a cavalcade here, and you may cut me off, but the who owns Solar Winds? That's not open source, right?
Right. That's correct.
How'd that go?
Yeah. I, I, I,
You know,
I can see
not
the point. I can see the point. I guess the CISO side of me, right, goes, I can't put policy around it. I don't control the
right.
SDLC. I can't even do code verification on it because it's all open source unless I bring it in myself and have my developers go through it line by line. Um,
Wait a minute, wait a minute. Isn't that what everybody does with open source?
everybody goes through every open source project line by line.
And that was my understanding. That's what I do. So,
All right. Well, now that we've established that Tracy lives in a fantasy land, especially when it comes to how real IT works,
just
I
kidding, I still.
I know you are. I know you are. Let's drop into a couple questions. I know we're a little bit over time, but Tracy's agreed to stick around for a little bit longer. Make sure you do get your questions dropped into chat. We're gonna hit more of an AMA style, Tracy. We're gonna kind of go through a couple of questions here. Um, let's start with this one from our good friend Fasochi Actual, who I think sat up all night waiting to ask you questions because half my question board here was filled with Fasochi's questions. If you had to start your cloud journey over again, what would you do differently?
All right. So my answer to that is, because this is a personal question.
Yeah,
You're asking me personally what I
yeah,
would do differently.
yeah.
I would probably focus on the, okay, I'm going to use that term again, big data and machine learning, because those are areas that absolutely fascinate me.
Mm.
And I started my career, so I started my career writing Fortran programs, but
After that,
also after that, working in databases, and so I've always worked with databases, and I've kind of let myself get away from that at a really intense level, and
mm.
I miss it a little bit. So again, that's probably not the good general. Hey, what does this apply to everybody? But honestly, that's me.
Yeah.
That's what I would have done differently.
Nice, nice. Miss Root, she's one of our VIPs coming in from South Africa. Always glad to see her in chat. Hey, Tracy, nice to meet you. Are you familiar with AZ500 cert, and is it a good one to have on your resume?
Yes and yes. I actually hold the AZ500, so I'm a let's see, I would say this right, Microsoft certified Azure Security Engineer Associate. it's kind of stupid to put engineer and associate in the same thing, but that's fine. Um, I would say that it is a good cert to hold. And particularly this is one of those things. This actually goes back to one of the first questions that was asked about going down the route of a cloud vendor. And actually, a question I didn't answer that I have an opportunity to do now would be relative to certification. So what's really cool right now with each one of the cloud vendors is that each one of them has a single security specific certification,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I've got AZ900 or AZ500, excuse me, on the Azure side. I think it's security associate. I'm not positive on that for both AWS and Google, but there's a specific security certification. And I think if you've got lots of experience in security, you've got some certifications, and you're looking to go into cloud. I think the cloud security certification is a really good foothold, right? Because it's going to say, with all of this security knowledge and expertise that I
You almost
have,
said stuff. You almost said stuff.
I know I try not to use those technical terms too much. So, um, okay, all of the knowledge that I have, but look, I can demonstrate that I can apply that knowledge in the cloud environment as well. And
Yeah.
so I think, again, on the Azure side, I think if I was a security professional, I would, and I was going and looking at Azure, that is 100% the certificate I would go for. Now, one thing I will say on the Azure side is keep an eye on it because they've now broken out some much more specific security related. I think they have two of them that are out now. One's out, one's beta. But I still, from what I've seen and from what I understand, and I'm still a Microsoft certified trainer, is that the AZ500 is still going to be that kind of general best practice security in Azure. And so I would absolutely recommend that you look at that if you're looking to go into Azure.
Nice. I think kind of on that same vein, right? When we talk about some of those baseline certs and getting into it, question from Fatfinger says, if you would have to start tomorrow from zero in the cloud, where would you start and why?
Okay, really simple. One of two directions. And this is full bias here on my part. I would take a look at getting some certification, and I would choose either Azure and go with an AZ900. And I know your question isn't what certification would I pursue, but I've got both I went and actually, ironically, I think the last certification I took, second to last, in Azure was actually the fundamentals, the AZ900. But get that because going through that and preparing for that is going to get you an understanding of what Azure is. And I'd say the AWS side, if you choose to go AWS, that the certified cloud practitioner is an absolutely great way to get yourself immersed and understand what AWS is. Get that foundation, because to me, and this is something that's always been important to me, is you have to have that foundation. You have to have something, so when you start getting that detailed information, you have something to tie it to, and start at the start. And ideally, and one of the things, long range goals we're looking at is to kind of have our own process where we're looking first at the generalities of cloud and then branching off. And honestly, as we build that out, keep an eye on us, and some of that's going to be freely available as our starter pass. It's not there yet, but I think, frankly, that's an even better way to go, right? Because then you're getting that full spectrum of cloud, and you can kind of make your decision then which cloud you want to go to. But I also think, quite frankly, and I say this with some experience in this, I'm 11 years into Azure, and it took me 6 months to get to the point where I can say I'm certainly not an expert, but I'm pretty comfortable in AWS now. So it's you're not locked in if you go if you start right now in one cloud vendor.
So on that same one, and I know you've got a developer at heart, so I know this question will kind of ring true with you coming in. Is do we need to learn a programming language before jumping to the cloud?
Yes. Next question. No. Uh,
That's an easy one, right?
when everybody needs a programming language. The truth is that the real answer to that is no, you don't. Um, and the thing of it is that there's a lot of administration. I remember back in the early 20 teens, and as cloud was really starting to catch on, and I was teaching classes, and I had people coming through, and they were really worried, right? Because they're like, this is all going to be click, point, click, and there's not going to be any room for administration, and we're all going to lose our jobs. That's not at all the case. There's absolutely an ops space
Mm-hmm.
in the cloud. 100% there is, right? Now, having said that, I think one of the things you've seen a trend in, and I'll actually take completely different Cisco, and as non-programming an environment as you can think of, right? We're talking hardware, switches, wires,
Right.
cables, all that, right? A big push in Cisco is DevNet, right? And I believe in their current round of certifications that some of the higher level certifications for Cisco actually require programming. And so, on the one hand, and here I go again saying yes and no in the same answer. The answer is, strictly speaking, no, you do not need a programming language. However, I would suggest that you become at least marginally proficient in a programming language. And I strongly recommend that programming language be Python.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
and
that's what everybody would say. I think that's pretty universal. Is that Python's like everybody should have Python.
it's used for everything, and I can give you multiple examples of the fact that it's not hard to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
It really isn't. And I love the language. I've started and not finished more Raspberry Pi projects using Python than I can count. But I actually learned Python specifically for that.
Yeah.
But I've used it countless other ways. So no, you don't need it, but yes, go learn it.
Awesome. So looks like I got a cybersecurity question here. As a cybersecurity beginner, should I care about learning cloud security? If so, how do I learn it?
Again, yes. And this time, actually, I mean that there's no alternative to that. Yes.
Yeah.
And what I would suggest is that you start your cloud security. If you are now, all right, so you're a cybersecurity beginner, and this is something that I would flip over to you. Okay, so let me ask you a question, Neal. I'm a cybersecurity beginner. Where do I start?
Start a pass on INE. Go take PTS. Go take that EJPT. It is it. I posted this on Instagram today, and I'm starting to get the hang of saying it. It is the CCNA of cybersecurity certs. Like it is something everybody should have. It's free, and it's going to teach you everything to be well rounded. But what I'll also say is it doesn't teach cloud security. And that's that's what I think that I would push back over to you is, do you think it's better to go to like an AWS or an Azure security course, or should we get better? And I mean, we as an industry on the cybersecurity side, should we get better about developing cyber specific cloud courses?
So here's the thing, and I'm glad you bounced it back because that's exactly where I was going. Right, get the fundamentals of cyber.
Yeah.
Understand, get that EJPT.
Mm-hmm.
Then get the fundamentals of cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because start at the fundamentals. That's what you need to do. And one of the things, and I'm gonna do a little bit of shameless promotion here.
Hold on, I think we're losing some connection. I might have to mute you here. Hold on.
First of all, right now, if you go over to the starter pass, Neal mentioned that you can go to our starter pass and you can take our course there that's going to prepare you for that EJPT, right, which is an industry recognized certification. Right now, if you go over to INE and you take the starter pass, you can also go through our AZ 900 course for free. This is going to prepare you for the Azure fundamentals certification, right? Now, we don't give you the certification, but I will tell you that I've heard back in recently from a number of folks that have gone through and have passed the exam, having gone through and studied for it through the starter pass. So, right off the bat, if you want to talk about starting out, that's preparation for 2 certifications that are going to get you started down that path. Now, what Neal said, and more shameless promotion, what Neal said about not being great about looking at cloud cyber, we have, I think it's fair to say, a pretty intense effort going on right now to fill that hole. And we are not there yet, but honestly, keep an eye on INE because we've got some fantastic folks. And I mean, one of them you've probably seen here, Phil, is he's working specifically on that. And we have other extremely smart and effective subject matter experts that are building this content. So
okay, so I see where you're going, and I see Dev Null in chat, and I'm gonna be like, nope, we're not dropping any secrets today. We're gonna go and stop that conversation right now. We're not gonna spill any beans today. Let's
I have no beans to spill.
Have no beans to spill. No beans to spill. Shanna B says, do you think the U.S. government is keeping up with the changes in cloud technology with regards to security and privacy regulations?
No.
You got to do better than that.
So, well, okay. Now I will say this, and honestly, I will say probably this is an area that, Neal, you are probably better suited to answer this question than I am. But I'm gonna give you my hack at this question, and I would love to hear what you have to say about it. I think it depends on what you're talking about, whether or not it's justified. And don't you dare disabuse me of this concept. I feel like at the most fundamental level that the U.S. Department of Defense has some very smart people that are very much ahead of this. I think it's pretty clear that the federal government as a whole is not completely up to speed. And I know that there have been, over the last several years, tremendous strides that have been made towards that. But it's always difficult when you're talking about government because, in 100%, just like I'm not dropping any secrets, we're not getting into politics. But no matter what you do, politics are part of it,
right?
And so that is always going to keep you a little bit behind the curve. Now, I will say that what in terms of internally for their own use, you do have completely isolated systems, cloud systems that the vendors have created for the government, right? So by and large, the government workloads that are in the cloud are not in the same cloud that you and I are using. But I honestly, not to sort of just punt here, but I'm just going to punt, and I'd be much more interested, Neal, in your take on this.
I think when you say government keeping up, those are oxymorons, right? I mean, you're never going to have government keeping up with anything. Call that cynical, call that views from within. I mean, I think it's I think as a general premise, the answer will almost always be no. There's no area where the government keeps up with anything. I think the government continues to struggle with the things that corporations struggle with, which is a long lead time and a lot of red tape to go from proof of concept into actual reality. And so I applaud the effort to move into the cloud, but I don't necessarily think that they move fast enough to keep up with all the cloud technologies. You and I had an interesting conversation. Maybe it was Brooks and I that had the interesting conversation, but I think maybe it would have been Brooks, right? But if you go into AWS one day and you see some functionality, you see something there that you want to take advantage of, that's awesome, and then you can literally go back the next day and it's completely different interface. They've dropped some new technology on you, and you're over there trying to figure out how to operationalize it and make it useful in your day-to-day job. And when you think about that model just on the AWS side, there are very, very few companies that can keep up with that level of innovation, let alone the government. And so I think when you
Right.
look at that model, even in that regard, I don't think you can ever have government and keeping up in the same sentence. Do I think it will make their stuff better? Yes, when they eventually get around to implementing it. But I'm very, very cynical in that regard.
So, I will add one more thing. And by the way, I would also like to point out that in the end, the answer is no. So I
Yeah.
was completely right in the answer that I gave. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah.
Is my no was the right answer? No, but I will also say, as a citizen that lives under the government, what's interesting and what's paradoxical is that's not always a bad thing, right? And I remember having this conversation. I was talking. I was this was many years ago, and I was having this conversation. I was teaching a course on a military base, and they were talking about their frustration with the fact that these new technologies come out, and then they're available to these guys 2 or 3 years later.
Hmm.
Well, part of that, though, to be fair, is that they're going through a vetting process. Ideally, right? These technologies, these capabilities are going through a vetting process so that by the time these folks are using them, they are a little more confident in the security of those features than maybe I am when I say, "Oh, look, something shiny and new that's in Azure," right? I mean, but isn't there some degree of that that's not so bad?
Well, but I think this is the chicken and egg conversation. I get back to me picking on Microsoft for this, right? When I sit in
Mm-hmm.
that CISO role and when I sit in that CIO role, I don't want to buy from a company that's 3 years behind where the adversary is today, right? And I use endpoint detection response. I use threat detection mechanisms and technologies like that, right? I don't feel comfortable going to the board of directors and saying, "Hey, I want $5 million, for an investment today, but I'm probably going to come back to you in 3 years for another $5 million to upgrade to Microsoft because they just now got it right versus what I needed to solve the problem 3 years ago." And so if I take that and extrapolate it out to our national defense strategies, I don't necessarily know that I would buy off on selling the public. Like, yeah, we have your best interest in mind, but we're going to be 3 to 5 years behind what our adversary is doing when it comes to national defense strategies.
Okay,
Yeah,
fair,
yeah.
fair.
So that's kind of my own take on that one. All right. So last question for you, Tracy, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. What did you find the most difficult when starting your cloud career?
So I totally cheated when I started.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! This didn't come up in our pre-interview. What?
Well, you hired me. What are you going to do? No, in truth, when I started cloud, well, I mean, technically, I kind of started cloud before it was cloud because I can say I used the AWS APIs before it was AWS. I was working for this really cool nonprofit literacy program, and we were using the Amazon APIs to get information on the books based on their ISBN. All right, I'm geeking out. My apologies. Right, and so but the reality is that was kind of my start to cloud was, hey, we have this need. There's this thing out here, and I've got some tools that I can use to just go and grab it. Cool. And now I'm using cloud, right?
Right.
And then when being a Microsoft fully enmeshed at this point in Microsoft, when Azure came out, Azure was basically a playground for .NET developers, and I was
Hmm.
absolutely a .NET developer. And there was like they put this little bit of stuff into Visual Studio that says, "Hey, you have a web app. How would you like to have that publicly available? Click a button, run it. Wow, right?" And so, I mean, in a sense, I sort of walked in on the shallow end
Uh-huh.
and just walked my way now. However, what I will say is what is most difficult going forward is what a lot of people have a problem with starting their cloud career, right? So that's when I say I cheated. I had such an easy inroad to it
Hmm.
that I was in the cloud before I realized it.
Yeah.
But you're coming in now, and what you're going to suffer is the same thing I suffer, and that is that it changes all the time. Like what you said, Neal, is probably the biggest barrier to entry for people coming into the cloud is that you start this learning process, and in the 6 months that it takes you to get at a fundamental level really operational in the cloud, there's all this new stuff. I always like to say, if I look away for 5 minutes, I feel like I'm 2 years behind.
Yeah.
But the reality is you're not. And the fundamentals, when it comes down to it, the fundamentals of cloud haven't actually changed.
Hmm.
And when I look at Azure and I look at AWS, the number of services, just service count, both of them are over 170 services. That's a lot of things to know. But the reality is, you don't need to know all of those,
Hmm.
because the vast majority of those services you're never going to use. Somebody's going to use. And if you ever need it, it's there, but you're not going to. And I think that information overload and that appearance of just this wave after wave of new stuff hitting you can be a real barrier to entry. But the reality is, like I said, that if you get the fundamentals and you learn to accept the fact that every time you go into AWS or Azure, something's going to change.
Hmm.
And as a content creator and as a lab creator, okay, I will say, if vested self-interest here, if you understand that when you go through a lab, by the time you do that lab, something will have changed a little bit, and so it won't match exactly with maybe a screenshot, right? But it's still fundamentally the same,
Hmm.
right? A virtual machine is still a virtual machine. A web application is still a web application. A database is still a database. And they give you more ways to implement them, but you stick to the fundamentals, and it makes that process a lot easier. So I think that might have been a soapbox moment, but I think there is the barrier you feel to entry is the same barrier that us experts and practitioners feel all the time as well. But it's surmountable.
But here will be my shameless plug on this, and one of the reasons why I bought into INE, before joining the role was, we bring practitioners to bear who will help you see through the FUD, if you will, of those 170 some odd, implementations, and say, here's what you need to know, and here's how you're going to be the best Azure, AWS practitioner, whatever the case is, in that regard. Tracy, thank you so very much for joining us today. Listen, for those who we obviously didn't get through every single Startrek question. I will ask everybody to stick around really quick because I'll have something to say after I send Tracy off. But if you didn't get your question answered by Tracy, I did drop your socials into chat, so you are going to get bombarded by my team here. That's watching on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you didn't get your question asked, then I'm a volunteer that you can go ask Tracy on LinkedIn and Twitter. He'll be more than happy to connect with you and whatnot. Tracy, thank you so very much. The floor is yours if you'd like to say some closing remarks.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much. And one thing that I will say is, with that hill you have to climb to get in there, I had a little bit of fun and I ran a little bit of an experiment. And this is going to sound like a shameless plug, and it's a plug, but maybe not shameless. One of the things we're doing at INE now that all of us instructors are so excited about is we're doing boot camps where we're doing these 3-day live interactive deep dive training sessions. And the first one that I did was cloud foundations. And what we did in 3 sessions, none longer than 4.5 hours, is we went from zero base to actually deploying a workload in the cloud. And so let us help you and let someone help you. My preference would be us clear that fog away, because it's none of this is inscrutable. None of it is insurmountable. The cloud is such a fun playground. When you take all of it away, when you take and you don't look at the 170 plus services that some percentage you're going to need for some certification exam, but you look and say, hey, it's 5 o'clock on a Friday and I have no friends. So rather than going out drinking, I would like to spin up a web application, and I can snap my fingers and I've got a web application. And for me, that's what's probably going to keep me cloud oriented for certainly the foreseeable future. Neal, I want to thank you so much for letting me have this opportunity. It's just so much fun to get to answer questions and just kind of have a chat here. And I hope I didn't intimidate anybody with my super complex background here. Not, Neal, you can aspire from what you have to get to this state of nirvana.
Thank you.
But thank you again very much. I appreciate it.
No problem. I'm gonna stick you in the green room. You can go do your own thing, and you and I can chat later. Listen, thank you all so very very much. I appreciate you tuning in. To the stream today. Hopefully you got a lot out of it. You all have been asking for cloud expertise for a while, and so it was really my pleasure to bring Tracy to you. I saw Brooks hanging around in chat. We're gonna try to get Brooks on stream, as well. Just a couple programming updates for everybody. Just so that you're aware, don't go anywhere tonight. Obviously, we've got a double header tonight. After this, we've got Joel and Brandon who are coming on to do their CISSP study group. And then you got Philip Wiley on for the Hacker Maker that's happening later tonight. So you're going to want to make sure you stay tuned into the Cyber and Security channel. Lots of great content coming at you tonight. Now, personally, on a personal note, obviously this is my last stream for about 7 days, pending, me getting a wild hair, up my where in the next couple of days to turn the camera on. As of today, I'll be packing up the studio. This will be the last time that you see this studio layout. Carmen and I will be on the road to our new location in North Carolina, and so make sure that you do hit !socials. Make sure you do have access to my socials so that you can pay attention to those Instagram Q&As, catch updates on Twitter, watch my chair dances on TikTok, watch me make fun of B-Sec and Amoeba on TikTok, all the great things that we do on all the socials. Make sure you are on Discord. Hit that Discord. Make sure you do pay attention to our Discord. You can catch moments like we did last night where we hop into Discord and, we just kind of do like an after hours chat and chill inside of Discord, so make sure you are on that. Don't think that we're going anywhere, however. There will be streaming programs for you to watch, all cybersecurity related, every day this week except for Sunday. Joel is starting his new programming segment tomorrow called Stack Cyber, where he's going to go over Threat Quotient, the threat intelligence platform. So you're not going to want to miss that. So do make sure you got those notifications turned on. Do make sure you're tuned into the channel. And listen, whether you're on the red side, whether you're on the blue side, or whether you're still deciding, keep learning. And I'll see y'all next time.